From ships that came into conflict during times of war to accidents and ship collisions that could have been avoided. We are back with a part 2 of the top 10 secret shipwrecks that might be worse than the Titanic. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Mont Blanc and Imo. Halifax is a port city that is located here in Canada in the province of Nova Scotia. Halifax was a super important place during the First World War as it acted as a hotspot for ships that were carrying supplies, troops, ammunition, war stuff. On December 6th, 1917, a Norwegian ship called Imo left Halifax and it ended up colliding with a French ship called the Mont Blanc. This is already disastrous, but it was made significantly worse by the fact that the Mont Blanc held explosives. Because of the collision, the Mont Blanc was pushed towards the shore and ended up setting the harborfront ablaze. Just a few minutes later, the entire ship exploded with a blast so strong that windows 50 miles away were shattered. Unfortunately, there were many people at the waterfront when the explosion happened, which led to 1,800 people dying in this accident. 9,000 people were injured, and it is said that 1,600 homes were destroyed in the blast. The force of this blast really cannot be understated. It was so powerful that it caused a tidal wave and violent tremors, which were able to uproot trees from out of the ground. They damaged railroad tracks, and they destroyed numerous buildings whose debris was scattered for hundreds of yards. In the end, this is what made this explosion one of the most violent non-nuclear explosions in history, and what makes it likely the world's largest accidental man-made explosion. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Toya Maru. This ship was a Japanese train ferry that was out to sea in between the islands of Hokkaido and Honshu in 1954 when it was struck by Typhoon Marie. The captain tried to ride it out and attempted to anchor the ship in place, but the winds were so strong that it broke free. Seawater began pouring into the engine compartment, which then caused the steam engine to quit running, and the ferry was then completely uncontrollable. The captain continued to try whatever he could to get the ship to safety, and he even tried to beach the ship, but unfortunately the waves were just too powerful. After being tossed around in the waves and battered by the water, and after all the rain and strong winds, the ship ended up capsizing and sinking. In the end, 1,163 people lost their lives in this disaster, including 35 American soldiers who were members of the US Army's 1st Cavalry Division Artillery. The Toya Maru wasn't the only ship sunk in this storm, as Typhoon Marie also sank 4 other ferries as well. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Taiping Steamer. In 1949, the Taiping Steamer was out to sea and was seriously overloaded with 1,000 war refugees on board. This ship was sailing from Shanghai, China to Keelung, Taiwan when it collided with a cargo vessel called the Qianyuan. At the time of this accident, the Taiping was fleeing the Chinese Civil War, which is why it was so overcrowded when it only should have been holding a maximum of 580 passengers. This kind of overcrowding did not help with the sinking of the ship and sadly only sped up the process. It is also said that the ship was steaming without lights even though it was after curfew, which of course likely didn't help to avoid this very tragic situation. Sadly, there were 1,500 people who lost their lives in this collision. In our number 7 spot today, we have the SS Principe Umberto. This ship was built in 1909 as an Italian passenger ship, but in the times during the First World War, it ended up being converted into an armed merchant cruiser. On June 8, 1916, this ship was transporting troops on the Adriatic Sea. These troops were part of the 55th Infantry Regiment and were on their way back from Albania to Italy. Although the ship was accompanied by others, it still ended up being struck by an Austro-Hungarian U-5 submarine that had launched a torpedo attack. This ship ended up sinking just minutes later, and it is said that this disaster took the lives of 1,926 men, making it the worst naval disaster of the First World War in terms of lives lost. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Yamato. This ship was a Japanese battleship that served in the Second World War. She was the lead ship of her class of battleships, and she was one of the 2 of the heaviest and most powerfully armed battleships ever constructed. On April 7, 1945, the ship was about 300 kilometers south of the Japanese island of Kyushu when it was confronted by a US carrier-based aircraft. This aircraft bombed the ship, which led to it capsizing. This then caused the ammunition on board to explode, which tore the ship in 2. After a total of 13 torpedo hits and 8 hits, the ship completely sunk. The ship was accompanied by a light cruiser and 4 other destroyers, which were all sunk in this event as well. This sadly led to thousands of deaths, as most of the crew lost their lives in this battle. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Iosif Stalin. The Iosif Stalin was of course a Soviet passenger ship that was converted to carry troops during the Second World War. This ship was very important to Soviet forces as it was used in 1941 in the evacuation of Tallinn and was later used to evacuate the Soviet naval base in Hanko, Finland. Just after this evacuation, on December 3rd, 1941, the ship ended up entering the Gulf of Finland, where it encountered 3 German mines. This led to the crew scrambling around to try and fix up the damage that the mines had caused. While they were distracted by this, Finnish forces ended up spotting the ship and saw an opportunity to strike. This led to the ammunition that was on board the Soviet ship to detonate, which ended up taking the lives of 3,849 out of the 5,589 who were on board. Those who didn't lose their lives in this incident ended up being captured and held as prisoners of war by the German forces. In our number 4 spot today, we have the SS Cap Arcona. This ship was a German luxury ocean liner that was launched in 1927. But by the time the mid-1940s rolled around, however, like many other ships on this list, this one was put to use to help in the country's war efforts. This time, this ship was converted into a prison ship. In April of 1945, with the advance of the British Army, prisoners being held at concentration camps were being loaded onto ships, and the Cap Arcona was one of them. On May 3rd, 1945, with more than 6,000 people on board, the ship was attacked by the British Air Force. The prisoners on board were being held below deck at the time, and the ship was not marked with any sort of red cross, so unfortunately those in the British Air Force did not realize that the ship was filled with prisoners at the time. The ship capsized but did not sink entirely, but still this wreck caused somewhere around 5,000 deaths. In our number 3 spot today, we have the HMS Armenia. This was a Soviet passenger ship that was first launched in November of 1928, and she had a maximum capacity of 980 passengers. During the Second World War, this ship was put to use by transporting troops, and from October 9th, 1941, the ship was used to evacuate soldiers, workers, and materials from Odessa. In November of 1941, there was the invasion of German troops that led to an extreme rush to evacuate the hospitals in the city of Sevastopol, and the Armenia was repurposed again into a hospital ship. This led to about 4,000 wounded people and medical personnel from 11 different hospitals being loaded onto the ship to set sail towards Yalta. Once there, another 1,000 passengers were loaded onto the ship in a rush, none of which were officially recorded. On November 7th, the ship was attacked by a German Heinkel HE-111, and in just 4 minutes the ship sadly sank, taking the lives of almost everyone on board. Just 8 people survived the entire ordeal. In German records, there is no mention that the Armenia was a hospital ship, so it's unclear if they omitted that tale or if they mistakenly believed that it was a troop carrier. Either way, it is absolutely devastating. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Arctic. This ship made its maiden transatlantic voyage in 1850, and it was best known for its speed. This ship was able to cross the Atlantic in just 9 days. On September 27, 1854, the ship was sailing from Liverpool to New York City when it collided with a French steamship called the Vesta. This occurred in the thick fog that was found just off of Cape Race, Newfoundland. At first it appeared as though the Vesta had received more damage in the collision, but soon the captain of the Arctic realized that the ship was rapidly taking on seawater. He decided to abandon the Vesta and head for land in order to save his passengers, but once he left the other ship, the damaged Arctic continued to take on water, which then put out the furnaces and caused engines to stop working. This is when the captain ordered that those who were the most vulnerable be placed into the lifeboats first, but instead a number of crew and male passengers dashed towards the lifeboats, leaving hundreds of people to go down with the ship. There were about 400 people on board the ship that day, and only 87 of them survived. 22 of the survivors were passengers, and the rest, crew. The captain went down with the ship, but he managed to stay alive by clinging to some wreckage until rescue came. The other ship, the Vesta, did not sink and ended up making it to St. John's, Newfoundland. The crew members who abandoned everyone else on the ship were criticized for their behavior, which violated the laws that forbid sailors to put their own safety before that of passengers in emergencies. Despite this, however, none of the men were prosecuted for their actions. In our number 1 spot today, we have the RMS Lancastria. This ship was a British ocean liner, but in April of 1940, she was reconstructed to be a troop ship under the command of Captain Rudolph Sharp. He sent the ship off to help aid in the evacuation of British British troops and citizens from France, and on June 14, 1940, the ship departed from Liverpool. On June 16th, the ship anchored near the town of St. Nazaire, and the following day, somewhere between 4,000 and 9,000 refugees loaded on board. This included civilians, soldiers, and other military officials. While carrying all of these people, around 4 p.m. on June 17th, the German Junkers Ju-88 the ship, which caused it to capsize and sink in an extremely fast 20 minutes. This caused over 1,400 tons of fuel to leak into the water, some parts catching fire, and while there were 2,477 survivors, no one is quite sure how many people lost their lives. This is because it was obviously a hectic rescue mission that had people rushing aboard. No one is quite sure just how many people were on board before the attack happened. It is thought that somewhere from 4,000 to 6,500 people might have lost their lives during this, which is truly a terrifying number. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thank you so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you next time. Bye!